When Walter Scott was born in 1771, all Europe was aflame with the story of Ossian. Ossian, the ancient Caledonian bard, the blind Celtic harper, whose poems from the Scottish Highlands seemed so wild and revolutionary in style, even Napoleon would carry them in his pocket. Ossian had sparked a craze for ballad collecting, to which Scott confessed himself addicted. Ballads were long narrative songs that sang of heroic deeds and the supernatural, and seemed to belong a bardic tradition that reached back to the Middle Ages and beyond. Across the North Sea, ballads and the idea of bardic tradition excited German philosophers and poets who saw in Ossian a Homer of the North, an epic poet for northern climes and a model for rejuvenation of their own literature and music. Out of their interest came a stream of Ossian-inspired orchestral works and a whole new genre, the art ballad, a dramatic storytelling form for singer and piano that plunged the listener back into the world of the bard. The art ballad owed its origins to Ossian, but its popularity in part to Scott, who too had become a literary sensation in Europe and Scandinavia. Scott, who confessed himself mad for this new German literature, wove ballads and the singing of ballads into his poems and historical novels, creating, out of the memory of music, an idea of North that was far greater than the sum of its parts. To Scott, the ancient Highland bard, the lowland ballad maker, and the old Scandinavian skald were minstrels, each of their own northern climate and country, sharing, perhaps unwittingly, a story stock that had travelled in oral tradition amongst them. He was fascinated by the theory of connection between ancient Scottish and Scandinavian ballads, and was the first to translate a whole Icelandic saga into English. Scott's world was the North, an all-encompassing cultural identity embracing the Celtic, the Germanic and the Nordic. To step into Scott's world, as Norwegians Andreas Munch and Edvard Grieg were to do decades after his death, was to step into a North new made from old, a rediscovered past that brought with it the promise of renewal of national voice and identity far beyond Scotland. Harp of the North, that mouldering long hast hung on the wych elm that shades and fillens spring, and down the fitful breeze thy numbers flung, till envious ivy did around thee cling, muffling with verdant ringlet every string. O minstrel harp, still must thine accents sleep? Mid rustling leaves and fountains murmuring, still must thy sweeter sounds their silence keep, nor bid a warrior smile, nor teach a maid to weep. The composer who made this song was Edvard Grieg, and the poet who made its words, Andreas Munch, two sons of 19th century Norway. Men of the north, they would meet in the south, in the heady atmosphere of the Scandinavian Association for Artists and Scientists in Rome. There, in the Italian sun, in the lively company of artists such as playwright Henrik Ibsen, who annoyed everyone by getting drunk, they would spend the winter of 1865, dreaming, philosophizing and drinking skål to Scandinavian art and their own developing ideas of cultural identity. Munch was already in the Papal City when the young Grieg, fresh from his studies in Leipzig and a formative spell in Copenhagen, arrived. Grieg was on a Bildung journey, a journey of personal and artistic self-discovery. In Copenhagen, he had helped found an audacious Nordic concert society with his friend and compatriot Rikard Nordrock, and there too been mentored by the father figure of Nordic music, Danish composer Niels Vigier, or Gade as Grieg might have known him. Gade had put Nordic music firmly on the map with his orchestral overture Efterklange of Ocean, Echoes of Ocean, and two more Ocean-inspired works, Celtic in theme, Germanic in style, and Nordic, so it was felt, in tone. But Grieg was impatient to put his own Nordic mark on the map, a Norwegian mark. Talt med Munch, talked with Munch, he wrote excitedly in his diary. Grieg was just 22 and barely known when he met the great Andreas Munch, who was over 30 years his senior and one of the most famous writers of Norway. Munch had mixed up the time of their meeting, but no matter. A conversation was begun, and so too, from Rome, a lasting friendship. Munch was a fan of Walter Scott, and Grieg, whose great-grandfather was Scottish, had grown up with Scott's Waverley novels, The Bride of Lammermoor, The Monastery, Old Mortality, and several more, had graced the shelves of his boyhood home back in Bergen. So there was plenty common ground, not to mention the story of how Scott had once met in Rome with Thorvaldsen, the famous Danish sculptor. All the same, something deeper drew Grieg to Munch. Rome was a place of ruins, yet grandeur, a testament to lived experience, and experience was what the young composer saw in Munch. Munch had suffered tragedy. He had lost a wife and child, and in his poetry collection, Sorg og Trøst, Sorrow and Solace, he had penned his grief in a commanding variety of poetic forms. In one, the Harp, a ballad imitation, Munch had buried his pain in a scene plucked from their own Nordic past. Struck by its power, Grieg set about setting it, naturally, I balladeton, in art ballad style, to music, making of it a miniature musical drama with shifting colours, echoes of the harp, and real characters who spoke. It was a gift to his northern musical imagination. The poet, a bard or skald at his harp, recalls an old legend which tells of a medieval lady and her knight at the moment of their parting. It is evening. The lady of the ballad, like the bard setting the scene, is playing her harp and singing as the knight sits by her feet. Her music, full of yearning, moves him deeply. At dawn, he must leave on a long journey. Only the harp will tell of his fate. Grieg was passionate for his art and passionate for life. He was engaged to be married to an exceptional singer, Nina, who, like the lady in the ballad, sang to her own accompaniment and waited as the man of her heart journeyed. Nina was in Copenhagen, Edvard in Rome. lady and knight of their own romantic ballad, theirs was a love bond made in music.
Den trofaste rider still ved hennes fötter låg. Till hon trygg och vill mest förstå, det klagde om ett jag om skärhets sorg och list. Och följde den samen fly, djupt i sitt eget bröst. Djupt i sitt eget bröst.
In the summer of 1862, just 3 years before meeting the young Edvard Grieg in Rome, Munch would make a pilgrimage to Scotland, to the land of the writer he called his patron saint, Walter Scott. Arriving by train in Edinburgh, Munch surveyed the Scottish capital and before him the towering monument built to the memory of Scotland's great storyteller. But surely, he noted in his travel journal, the figure of Scott in the middle was facing the wrong way, towards the city's new town, when it should be facing the old, a place of history Scott alone had brought alive in his writings. Indeed, what was Scotland without Walter Scott, he wrote, but a fierce, little-known northern nation of desolate mountains and dark fjords, a rumbling echo of ocean. Scott, he added, had transformed it, for all the world, into the promised land of beauty, romanticism and poetic memory. Scott's Scotland, with its striking cultural identity, was encouragement to his own little-known northern nation, Norway. By train again and on by horse and carriage, Munch made his way with a party of fellow Scandinavian tourists to the Scottish borders and the object of his pilgrimage, Abbotsford. On reaching Abbotsford, the home Walter Scott had created and loved to the end of his life, Munch's heart leapt. From my early youth a warm admirer of Walter Scott, he wrote, I now turned my step with emotions like those a faithful pilgrim must have when nearing the place his patron saint has lived and worked. As a boy, Munch had hung around the old bookbinders in Christiania, today's Oslo, waiting patiently amidst Norway's finest ladies and the musty smell of glue for a worn copy, any copy, of Scott's novels or poems he could borrow. Now, at Abbotsford, conveyed into Scott's magnificent library, Munch could see all the books of Scott he could dream of, and so many more. For his poem, The Harp, Munch had drawn on a scene from Roar Saga by the Danish writer he admired almost as intensely as Scott, Adam Oehlenschläger. But if the scene came from Oehlenschläger, a princess playing her harp and moving a king to tears, the style came from Scott, who revelled in the role of minstrel narrator and was the creator of a string of harp-playing heroines famed like Ellen, Lady of the Lake, or Flora, or Annet. Did he know that Oehlenschläger too admired Scott and had sent a complete collection of his works to Abbotsford? or that Scott possessed saga writings and an old volume of Kempeviser, ancient Danish ballads. Eulenschläger had written to Scott to thank him for showing how the past could be written as a human story. Munch could hardly know that surrounded by the Scottish writer's vast array of volumes, he was surrounded too by his oldest and best Scandinavian friends. Bidding Scott's borders abode farewell, Munch headed now for the Highlands to Loch Katrine, home of Scott's Lady of the Lake and his Harp of the North. Munch, like Scott before him, must see and feel the spirit of a landscape before writing of it. He was translating Lady of the Lake, Scott's hugely popular poem, for readers in Denmark and Norway. But there was more. Scott had worked an ancient Danish ballad into his poem, turning it into a new ballad sung by a Scottish bard about a lady with fingers small that want on harp to stray. Might the lady Edvard Grieg would portray in his song about the harp really, thanks to Munch, be Scots? It was the kind of cultural North Sea crisscrossing that Scotland and Scandinavia had long enjoyed, but that Scott and Munch in their own writerly ways would continue. Looking across Loch Katrine, Munch felt Scott had been right to call its cliffs and heights fragments of an earlier world. The whole confusion seemed to me rather lovely, he confessed, perhaps because my Norwegian eyes cannot resist drawing parallels with the huge mountain ruins of our own dales and passes. Munch felt his soul nourished. Here was a cultural memory, a music, like a ballad, to share. His pilgrim's journey over, Munch knew that wherever Scott struck his harp, the North would live.
Day